At my company's 4th of July picnic in 1991, I got lucky. It's not what you think. I won the door prize. 2 round-trip airline tickets, good for anywhere in the continental US. 3 months later, I used those tickets to spend a week in San Francisco with Doug, who I'd been dating casually for a little while. Neither one of us had been to San Francisco before, and the trip would give us a chance to get to know each other a little better and decide if we were ready to go to the next level of couplehood. As a bonus, we'd get to spend time with my brother Jonathan, who had moved out to San Francisco a few years earlier. We were going to be in town from a Tuesday through the following Monday. Jonathan wasn't available until the weekend, but that was fine. We planned a Sunday day trip to Monterey. This would give us a chance to go visit that great aquarium they have there, and along the way, Jonathan would get to know Doug, and I could get to know Jonathan's girlfriend, Ellen. Meanwhile, Doug and I did all the touristy things. Fisherman's Wharf, Alcatraz, cable cars, you name it, we did it. We kept ourselves on East Coast time, so our days started pretty early, at 6 a.m. And we always started with coffee at this great little place we found a block away from our hotel. It served the serious coffee that they had in San Francisco but hadn't made it here to DC yet. Starbucks and places like that were still a few years away. And as we explored the city, we laughingly quoted lines to each other from a stand-up comedy special that we had watched in our hotel room. But as the week wore on, we laughed less and less. We had never spent this much time together alone before, and we were starting to get on each other's nerves. On the Friday, we took one of those package bus tour trips to Sausalito and Muir Woods, and Doug was downright cranky the entire day. He was especially annoyed at the tour guide who entertained us with his cheesy celebrity imitations. Although Doug did perk up when we got to Sausalito, and the tour guide announced in his very best Cary Grant voice that at the shopping place where we would have a 30-minute break, there was a whiskey bar that featured a vast array of single malt scotch. Bingo. That's where we spent our break. And we were the very last people back on the bus. In fact, they were just getting ready to leave without us. But it was worth it because those 30 minutes spent sipping scotch that was older than he was mellowed Doug out to the point where we made it through the rest of the day without his biting anyone's head off. On Saturday, we opted to spend some time apart. I took the opportunity to have lunch with my brother Jonathan. We got some friendly sibling catch-up time, and we also finalized our plans for the Monterey trip the next day. He and Ellen were going to pick us up at 9 a.m. Then we would take the scenic route down to Monterey, get there in time for lunch, spend a few hours visiting the aquarium, then grab some dinner and drive back to the city in the early evening so Doug and I could pack up for our trip home the next day. What could possibly go wrong? The next morning, on Sunday, Doug and I started our day at 6 a.m. as usual. We had 3 hours to kill, so after we got our coffee at our usual place, we went back to the hotel and had a leisurely breakfast. Then we went to our room and watched the stand-up comedy special again. 9 o'clock came and went. No Jonathan, no Ellen. I left a voicemail on their machine at 9:30. Jonathan called back right around 10. Sorry, the sermon at church went long this morning. He said this in the tone he used when he was lying through his teeth, but trying to be charming about it. We'll be there in a half hour, okay? Okay. Doug rolled his eyes at this news. 45 minutes later, they arrived at our hotel. Jonathan introduced us to Ellen, whose very first words were, "I need coffee." No problem, said Doug. There's this great place right on the next block. We can hit it as we head to the highway. No, there's a place in our neighborhood that I like. I want to go there instead. Their neighborhood, where they had just come from, was a half an hour away. I gave Jonathan a look that said, seriously? But he avoided making eye contact with me and didn't say anything. So back to their neighborhood we went. Doug and I stayed in the car with Jonathan while Ellen joined the line of people spilling out of the door of this trendy coffee place near their apartment. She came back 15 minutes later with her prized coffee in her hand, very annoyed at how long it had taken her to get her coffee. It was 11:30 a.m. We should have been approaching Monterey by then, not just starting out. But I reminded myself that the whole point was to enjoy the company and enjoy this journey that we were lucky enough to share. But as we finally hit the road southward toward Monterey, Ellen opened up a textbook and started studying for an exam. Doug curled up for a nap. Jonathan turned on the car radio and drove silently, looking straight ahead the whole time. I was all alone in a car full of people. So I watched out the window and saw the city turned into farm country, and I listened to the classic rock music on the radio. The music was interrupted a few times by a news flash about a brush fire in Oakland that was threatening to go out of control. We were on the road for 90 silent minutes, and the news was reporting that the fire had jumped a freeway and was starting to destroy homes in Oakland, when we hit a sudden traffic jam in the middle of nowhere. We were on a 2-lane road surrounded by fields full of flame-colored pumpkins. 30 minutes of bumper-to-bumper traffic later, we discovered the reason for the traffic jam. We had stumbled upon what was apparently the absolute Woodstock of pumpkin festivals. People and pumpkins as far as the eye could see. It was very tempting to stop and see what all the pumpkin fuss was about, but we pressed on toward Monterey in silence. An hour later, the fire was starting to threaten homes in Berkeley when we finally arrived in Monterey. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. We needed food. Only Ellen didn't want to eat anywhere too touristy, so it took a little while to find a place that met with her approval. I remained optimistic that once we were out of the car and got some food and alcohol into us, that we would relax and talk to each other and enjoy each other's company. I was wrong. Ellen complained about every little thing, and she only talked to Jonathan. Jonathan still couldn't bring himself to look me in the eye. And Doug wasn't talking to anybody. The scowl on his face told me that there was not enough single malt scotch in the entire world to make him enjoy himself. When we finally, mercifully, finished with our lunch, it was 4 p.m. The aquarium that we had come all this way to visit closed at 5. And if you've ever seen the movie National Lampoon's European Vacation, in particularly the scene where the Griswold family sprints through the Louvre to see everything before it closes, then you know how our aquarium visit went. Only instead of the Mona Lisa and the Venus de Milo, it was penguins and a giant squid. When we left the aquarium, it was getting dark, and there really wasn't anything left for us to do in Monterey. So we piled into the car and headed back toward San Francisco. News of the Oakland fire was being broadcast nonstop, and the news was very grim. The atmosphere in the car was just as grim, and the somber silence was broken only once, when Doug offered, a little too belligerently, to take the wheel from Jonathan because he was driving too damn slow. Jonathan declined just as belligerently. We finally got back to the hotel, and Ellen gave us a little bye from the front seat. And Doug's farewell was just as dispassionate. But Jonathan got out of the car and came over and gave me a big hug, although he still couldn't look me in the eye. The whole point of this trip had been for us all to get to know each other and find out where our relationships were. And I guess we did that after all. Doug and I ended our relationship pretty much as soon as we got back home to DC. And 2 months later, Jonathan and Ellen broke up too. And on that Monday morning, when our plane took off from San Francisco, we circled over the East Bay. And I looked down on acres and acres of blackened rubble where people's homes had been in Oakland and Berkeley. Such a disaster and so much loss. And those words can be used to describe my week in San Francisco. Only in that moment, looking down, I felt incredibly lucky. Thank you.